Welcome to At Issue. My name is H. Wayne Wilson. We're at the 1-year mark for medical marijuana use in the state of Illinois. November the 9th of 2015, dispensaries in the state were legally allowed to sell marijuana, or let's call it cannabis, to patients with certain conditions or diseases. And that's the topic of the next half hour of conversation with a Peoria attorney who is an expert in that arena. And his name is Rodney Nordstrom. Thank you so much for joining us,
Thanks for having us, Wayne.
And also with us is Eric Dieckhoff. Eric is the general manager of Revolution Cannabis Delavan. It's part of Revolution Enterprises out of the suburbs of Chicago.
That's correct.
And you have actually two facilities. You oversee the Delavan one.
Yeah, Delavan and Barry.
Barry, which is down in Pike County,
Correct.
Southwest of Peoria. Let's first of all, we did ask the state of Illinois, the medical director of the program director of the medical marijuana program in Illinois, named Jack Campbell, and we received an email back that said the state will not be able to participate. Thank you for the invite. So that's why the state is not represented at this table. Let's start first with a description. There are dispensaries which actually sell the marijuana, and then there are cultivation centers. You operate a cultivation center. Can you describe it and what you do, just in thumbnail sketch?
Well, we have two 75,000 square foot facilities. They are not fully operational, but we do have a portion of those buildings being used currently. We have a lab, we have the cultivation center, we have the lab, the kitchen, and processing area within this facility. And everything is done at these facilities and then sold to the dispensaries at that point.
When you say sold to the dispensaries, how do you, do you deliver it to them?
Correct. We have very strict regulations on how we can transport it, but we do have security that delivers the product to these dispensaries.
And when you talk security, what's security like at your facility?
It's very tight. We have a fence around the facility. Every employee has a card that they have to have with a code number they have to punch to be able to get in that's personalized to them. Once they come into the facility, they get their card that is given to us by the state that shows that they are an employee of the cannabis program. And at that point, as they come into the facility, they are restricted to the rooms that they are designated to be available to get into, which I have access to security to make sure that they can only go into those specific rooms.
Let's talk about what cannabis is. We all remember the days of Cheech and Chong. Acapulco Gold and, no stems, no seeds that you don't need, things of that nature. This is completely different today. Is there a way to characterize cannabis today versus 1960s and 70s?
Well, sure. It's a legitimate medicine now. For many years, the federal government has prohibited research as to the medicinal effects of cannabis, and now those are loosening up a little bit. However, the federal government, as everyone probably knows, still considers this a Control 1 scheduled drug in the same category as heroin, LSD, cocaine, and other serious drugs. So it's become more of a science. People now are understanding the medicinal effects of cannabis, and almost every day there's new research that suggests how this medicine can improve people's lives.
Do you have to worry about federal regulations? You're operating within the state of Illinois under
Correct.
Illinois laws.
No, we don't have any federal regulations that we have to deal with. We have the main point of contact is the Department of Ag, who oversees our cultivation center, and we have inspections once a week that they come in, and they can do more if they choose to. Currently, they are doing about one inspection a week, and they'll come in and they can pick out anything in our facility to look at, and we just have to abide by that. They've been very good to work with. We are very heavily regulated, the most heavily regulated state in the country.
And you actually have how many cameras on premise?
Oh, I'm not going to give the specific number, but we have several cameras within the facility.
And you have to keep those for a period of time so that...
We have 90 days of on-site footage that we have to be able to give the state at any time. And then we have 90 days off-site. So we have 180 days of data that we have to keep at the facility.
So before we get into the storefronts and things of that nature, who qualifies for this? First of all, the law has been extended to 2020 now. It's still classified as an experiment, is that right?
Yes, yes, absolutely. Ongoing experiment, yes.
Who qualifies for using medical marijuana?
Well, there are today 44 conditions that qualify. In other words, you have to get a physician to document that you have one of these pre-approved medical conditions. That list is expanding very frequently, so we're adding new conditions each year. So you have to go to a doctor, you have to present your medical records. The doctor has to have a meaningful relationship with you. In other words, you can't see your doctor over the internet or over the telephone. The doctor actually has to see you, and you have to establish a meaningful medical relationship, which some people interpret as about 3 visits. The doctor will interview you, review your records, and then fill out a piece of paper where he or she documents that you have one of the qualifying medical conditions.
But they're not writing a prescription. Is that a legal thing?
Yeah,
with
it's
them?
a legal term. It's never really been a prescription because of the antagonism between the federal system and the state system. In other words, the feds still control medical licensing and scheduling of drugs. So in order to negate that potential problem for physicians, and physicians have generally been reluctant, even though informally they will say they're much in favor of this, they're just afraid of some sort of federal repercussions about that. So it's really not a prescription. It's now, it used to be a recommendation, and now it's simply documentation. In other words, all they need to do is just sign off that you have one of the qualifying conditions. 2 of the most popular ones, the most recent ones, are post-traumatic stress, which we're very thankful that got approved. That's probably the single most largest cohort or group that will benefit it. Other ones that are pending are migraine headache, for example. We're very active in trying to get that passed as well, qualifies as a qualifying condition.
So when you look at these different conditions, does that dictate what type of cannabis, or do you research those kinds of things? You know, because a certain type of cannabis might work better for migraines as opposed to PTSD, et cetera.
Absolutely, and we're still researching that. We've handed out for patients through the dispensaries to get feedback, as much information as possible that we can take and make that medicine that they need available to them. A lot of it is still guessing, especially in the initial parts of it, is trying to figure out what the market was going to need. So it's very tough to choose the strains that we can grow and which ones were going to be the most popular. And so it's been tough to figure that out.
So in addition to the type of cannabis, the strain of cannabis, there's also a delivery method. I mean, it's not just a cigarette anymore.
No, we have one of the most advanced labs in the nation. One of our main things that we want to do in Revolution is to make sure that we have the cleanest, best medicine on the market. We've spent a lot of money in our laboratory to make sure that happens. Now, we have third-party testing that the state requires us to do, but we also do our own in-house testing. So the different forms that we were going to be coming out with, we're still advancing and growing as we expand our own facility, but we'll have several different methods of delivery.
And do you have some examples of how different types of cannabis can be delivered?
I do, H. You had mentioned that there's a flower that's generally involved, also known as shake, and that's where the product is cut and individually prepared. And it would come in a container much like this, and this would be a difficult container to open, especially if
like
you're,
a prescription
yeah,
drug.
Prescription thing. And the idea is you want to keep those that shouldn't have access, for example, children, being able to get into it. So it comes in shake, and people don't really smoke it around like you would think of the Cheech and Chong anymore. We're way beyond that. So even if you got it as a flower, you would prepare it into other kind of foods. You could make a butter, and there would be a ½ ounce of flour in here. And then you can melt it down, and you can add it, make your own brownies. Most people associate cannabis with brownies, but now it's in lollipops and gummy bears. And one of the things that's very common is for people to make it into a butter, which would be simply applied to popcorn. So it's not around people around smoking anymore. Vaporizers have become very popular. The pens that people use now, you can put a small dosage of cannabis in there, and it'll heat it up, and you're going to get a high THC intake from that. So we're seeing new applications, and they're made, of course, at the cultivation center. That product comes into the dispensary already prepared. They cannot prepare it at the dispensary, but you can prepare it at home. Foods now are very important in that.
So you deliver a raw product to the dispensary?
We can, and we will on most of those fronts. We still are not. We haven't chosen that avenue yet. We have our own edible line that we have. We have our vape pen cartridges that we have as well. We have a spray mist that you can spray underneath your tongue, which gives a quick delivery as well. We are still continuing those efforts and trying to make sure that they're the safest products out there. But we also can do, instead of, you said a high THC content, we can do just a CBD content as well. We don't have to do the THCs. And that's one of the things with our lab. We can mix two different strains and take a higher CBD count that maybe a patient would need, or a higher THC or a lower THC, depending on which the patient is needing.
Is there a way to describe the difference between THC, which I think most people know THC, they've at least heard the term, but CBD, that sounds like central business district to many people in
There's several
urban
different
areas.
cannabinoids within the plant, and each strain has different cannabinoids. And those cannabinoids actually have an entourage effect that we're finding. So you can have a synthetic version, but it may not work as well as something that has the natural plant cannabinoids. And that is still something we were researching, in the industry, is to find out why that works. What in that cannabinoid profile is affecting this patient differently than this patient. So it's something that we're still going to be researching and trying to find out as much information as possible. But we do know that different strains affect people differently for whatever reason. And a strain that would affect somebody this way for that potential disease or pain or whatever does not affect this person. So we have to try to get it to where it affects just that patient and whatever can help them the most.
So it's still a bit of a trial and error scenario.
It is. If you bring it in with a medical condition, and then there will be what's called a bud tender or an interview person that will look at your medical condition, and based upon that, it's a trial and error process, and try something with a certain concentration, a certain strength. And they're trained so that they know when you come in, if you have back pain or if you have migraine headaches or if you have Crohn's disease, they kind of know what to recommend. It doesn't work every time. And then when you come back next time, there'll be a person that will interview you and ask you how well it's working for you. And so you might not get the intended effects, and there will be a different trial and error process.
And just for the record, you can still get it in cigarette form.
Absolutely. If you purchase it in cigarette form, it would come in a typical bottle like this, little container. This container would hold 2 or 3 cigarettes in it, and people do smoke cigarettes, obviously, but that's really the minority, very small portion of how it's ingested.
Is there any concern over terminology? Does the state have a guideline in terms of we can't call it a joint anymore, or do we use the term marijuana? Or?
Well, it's a paradigm shift. People still associate this with some negative connotations. However, as I mentioned earlier, it's often going now into a more scientific area. It's getting the reputation is now increasing. Physicians now are on board. The research is indicating that this is really a pretty good product, and will, I believe, take the place of opioids, and doctors will now refer to this as opposed to traditional pain medication.
I want to mention too, a lot of people may think this is, the hippie industry or anything like that. This is a very professional business. I mean, we have an on-site attorney that we go through everything in our facility to make sure that we are compliant. We spend the extra money to make sure we have the best staff available to make sure that this industry succeeds. You mentioned Jack Campbell earlier. I've worked with Jack. He's a great guy to work with. He's tough but fair. Jeff Cox, who's the bureau chief right now, he has moved into Jack Campbell's position where Jack was, and has been great for our industry as well. He's still tough but fair, and we're all learning as we grow this industry to make it the most successful we can, yet the safest. So I wanted to make sure we got that point out there as well.
And let's again talk about the legal aspect in terms of the federal government. you represent clients in this field. The federal government, and you mentioned earlier, the federal government still says it's a class 1 drug. It's like heroin as far as the DEA is concerned. Yet we have, I don't know, how many states now have cannabis allowed either in medical or recreational form?
I don't have that number. Do you have that
Well,
number?
it's changing. As you know, there are several states now are going to recreational. Oftentimes the states get the medicine, the state finds out how lucrative it can be in terms of taxation. Millions and millions of dollars. This is a great opportunity for the state to make a system that may have been on the black market now to turn that into dollars for the state. So there are really no negatives to cannabis. No one's ever died from an overdose of cannabis. So it's a great opportunity. And when it goes to recreational, then that's where the explosion we see in terms of the income for the state.
And that's a good point too, because he brought up there's been 0 incidents of overdose or deaths since the program has started. And you will find that compared to opiates, I mean, there's 44 deaths a day with opiate addiction or an overdosing. And 4 out of 5 people that are addicted to opiates got through it from prescription medication. So this is very important to all of our patients out there. That this is a way for them to become to get medicine that is safe with no side effects and that is going to be helping them instead of hurting them in the long run.
And it might be a better alternative than the other medicines that otherwise would be prescribed.
It is. It's not. There's no question about it anymore. It's just that the medical profession is a lag period. It's a couple of years behind where we are. Now that the federal government is allowing research at universities to go ahead and apply this to certain medical conditions, it's just going to get stronger and stronger in terms of the areas that it can be used effectively.
We've got 5 states on the ballot this November. 5 states are asking for recreational, if voters would approve recreational use of cannabis. 3 other states are looking at ballot questions regarding medical use of marijuana. So it's a growing field in the United States. Yet there are still some other legal issues. For instance, if I work for an employer that does drug testing and I have a card from the state of Illinois that says I'm allowed to use cannabis for Crohn's disease, and my employer does a drug test and cannabis does stay in your system for some time, then I could lose my job over that. Legally, what's your advice in that regard?
That's a really good point. There are 2 main issues that I'm involved in. One is the employment aspect, and the other one is the driving. There is really no safe way, in terms of driving, there's really no scientific way to determine whether a person is driving under impairment with cannabis. In other words, does it affect your driving? Are you an unsafe driver because of you've consumed your medicine? The other one is the employment. You're right that in Illinois, as in most states, if you do a drug test and you have turn up positive for cannabis, the employer could technically fire you. So we're hoping to change that as employers become more and more educated about this. The one area that really seems to crop up over and over again is whether a person is engaged in a dangerous activity. Machinery operator, climbing ladders, for example. I can see that a little bit more about the testing of that, whether there might be an impairment or not. But for the average person, it wouldn't affect their performance at their job, and they would be able to perform their job safely. So education as it comes to the employment of a person and in terms of the driving under the influence or being impaired.
Would it be your position that actually a person with a card legally using cannabis for medical purposes might be more productive at work because it has eliminated the pain associated with the disease, what have you?
Well, I've never heard it quite put that way, that as a justification, but I could see that argument could be made, is that if you compare that to about 1/3 of our population is under the influence of opioids, for example, at the employment. So it's really no different, you see, whether you're taking an opioid or a cannabis product as a medicine. That will still show up, but that's pretty much what the employers are going to be looking at.
There's no clear definition here as to what your rights are as an employee of a company.
Well, it gets pretty complicated. There's several federal regulations. For example, the employer has to apply their drug testing in a consistent manner. So if they're going to, and they can't single you out for that if they believe you're under if you have a cannabis card. So as long as they test people randomly, as long as they follow their protocol, they can do pretty much whatever they want to.
And state law says certain industries, policemen, firefighters, et cetera, cannot use medical marijuana.
Well, yes, and that's generally true. However, they can use it as long as it doesn't interfere with their performance of their job. So a
That's
policeman.
a gray area, you know that, Rodney.
Well, that's it. That's why we have lawyers to help people educate courts on that.
And the point on that too is different strains will affect a person differently, like I've said before, but it also affects their mood. So you could have more of a sativa type of strain where it'll actually boost your mood, give you more energy, and make you more productive. You could have a more indica type strain that's going to, more towards bedtime, relax you, kind of help you sleep. And you can have the hybrids of the two combined and stuff like that to kind of give you that intermediate. But we're finding out, especially through testing and getting those surveys out, that how those plants are affecting each person. My mother is an actual patient right now. She just finally got her medical card. And the thing that's helped her has basically been her mood has increased. It's given her more energy and taken away a lot of her pain so that she can get a lot of things done that she wasn't getting done beforehand. The other thing we're finding is with her current disease that she has is it affects the flap in the back of her throat. And it's something that it's pretty neat to see. It's actually helping her swallow because while she's on it, and she knows when she's not taking it, she's choking more when she's eating food compared to
the epiglottis.
Yes, yes. And so, by that flap closing now because of, for whatever reason, the medicine, which we don't understand yet, it's helping that part of it to where she is able to swallow better. So there again, it just shows that those different kinds of strains could actually help make a person more productive throughout their day.
The conversation strikes me as one that we're talking about medicine and everybody has, marijuana. Well, but really, if this is a very refined science, or at least it's turning that way compared to what we associate the word cannabis or marijuana with. It's changed quite a bit.
It has. It's a paradigm shift. It's not going to happen overnight. It's not going to happen over a number of years, but we can gradually see now more people are in favor of it, or at least admitting publicly that they're in favor of it. So there's a great opportunity there. We haven't really even, I don't think, tapped into how this medicine can help traditional medical conditions. Alzheimer's, for example. We know that it can help with cancer patients. I read a study last week that had bone density. It can affect that. So there's a tremendous amount of application. As I said, it really has no downside.
Eric, Rodney mentioned the opportunity, and it occurs to me that now sales in September were $3.8 million across the state, but that's not what was expected, that it's not growing as fast as had been anticipated?
No, and it kind of caught us all by surprise. I mean, a lot of the conditions that we were expecting to open up didn't open up right away. There was, a change in governors. Governor Rauner, he was very slow to accept a lot of this, which is very cautious, which is understandable. It's starting to pick up now. We're getting a little bit more support from the state. We expect it to grow exponentially as the months continue on. We are at about a little over 1,000 patients being added per month, which is still slow. But I think with these new conditions that are being passed and being pushed through, we're going to see those numbers expand quite a bit.
Can I just
Sure.
Respond to what he's saying? He says the court system now is very in favor of this. In other words, they're very comfortable in terms of helping patients get their needed medicine. So we're going to see more and more court cases, where people were denied access to their medicine, or even how they ingest their medicine, whether it's in an apartment or at a school, or whether teachers have a responsibility to give the medicine to a child, let's say, who has epilepsy and needs a CBD, which is the non-active THC. It's just purely has an effect upon the epilepsy. Should school officials get in the business of giving that kind of medicine? I mean, those are the kinds of questions that we have to deal with.
So this is still a field that there's still some questions out there, and I have a feeling we'll be doing another program in the future as we grow this industry. It is 1 year now. November 9th marks the first year of legally selling medical marijuana in the state of Illinois through dispensaries. I'd like to say thank you to Rodney Nordstrom, who is an attorney who specializes in criminal defense, but also has developed an expertise in this particular arena. Thank you, Rodney, for being with us. And to Eric Dieckhoff, the general manager of Revolution Cannabis Delavan, part of Revolution Enterprises. And your facility isn't even at capacity yet.
No.
So there's room for growth there. We'll look forward to you visiting with us on that issue next time as we talk about the 18th congressional race. We'll have Darren LaHood and Junius Rodriguez on our next At Issues. See you then.